Council and members of the public will receive an update from staff on major general plan amendments. To provide this presentation, we will introduce Mr. Chris Hawkes, Peoria Planning Director. How are you doing, sir?
Yep. Great. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the time and the opportunity tonight. What I'd like to do is just spend a few brief minutes and talk about where we are in the general plan amendment cycle for 2024, and also talk about some recent refinements we've done to our proposed general plan amendments. So in our schedule, we have 9 public touch points. This will include, of course, public hearings before the Planning Commission and the City Council in months ahead. Most recently, we held 2 community meetings. One was held at Rio Vista, and the other was conducted online. We had approximately 50 attendees at each meeting, which if you've been to a general plan meeting, this is a great turnout, right? We don't normally get that many folks to a general plan meeting, so that's great. Separately through the process, we've also received 15 letters thus far from the general public. So what I'm going to do in my remarks is just briefly describe again what a general plan is, but I also, as I talk through the amendments, I want to step back a little bit through the process. There have been some misconceptions out there about what the amendment is and what it is not. And I'd like to, and sometimes these misconceptions then get amplified through, the media, social media, and so forth. And so I want to spend some opportunity and just clarify what we're doing and what we're not doing, and just provide a little more clarity to the discussion here. As a quick refresher, the general plan is the city's overarching policy document. It guides growth and development decisions into the future. It's intended to be aspirational and visionary. So the policies in the document, they guide on a multitude of topics. So if you look, I know it's hard to see the screen on the right, but there are about 22 topics, and these are all topics addressed in the general plan. They include things like land use, parks and open space, economic development, library, and so forth. So it's pretty comprehensive. Now, a little bit about general plans. Arizona is pretty unique in the country in that the state law requires that a general plan be ratified by the voters at least every 10 years. We're still the only state that requires a general plan to go to voters. So our last ratification was 2020, and we've had 2 prior ratifications before that. So very, very happy about those results. Now, when we look at the ratification of a general plan, good planning practice recognizes that a general plan is not a static document, meaning it's a typical practice across municipalities not only to look at refinements in the intervening years, but also to have a general plan that is continually responsive to evolving development conditions, evolving trends, new infrastructure inputs, and so forth. In fact, just looking back from between 2010 and 2020, we went through 7 to 8 annual cycles where we refined the general plan continually just to keep it responsive. So whereas the general plan sets the vision and outcome, the tactics, the strategies, those might be refined to, again, to remain responsive. So I like to think of it as the metaphor I would use is a road trip, right? You're going on a road trip over the summer, you have a destination in mind. How you get there, whether you walk or drive or bike or with the timing, those things all change. And so whereas the vision is set out there, how you accomplish that vision might be refined along the way. Now, state law recognizes that general plans will be updated from time to time. In the process, we've heard some sentiment that amendments should go to voters. And just to note, there is a process that's enshrined in state statute for how amendments are processed. So while the plan, and as I mentioned, the ratification is subject to that ratification process every 10 years, state law mandates that local elected body, the city council, has the authority and duty to act on any amendments. So we are obligated to follow the process enshrined by state statute, which is to process amendments through the city council. All right, what this graphic illustrates is just 4 areas of amendment that we're going through in the general plan. So we're talking about a new category, a new state land use category, and modifications to the land use map. We're talking about some changes to the circulation plan. This is a forward-looking document that identifies the roadway network of the future. To be honest on this one, about 90% of these are simply updates, just recognizing existing roadways that are there today. They're no longer future roadways, so those are maintenance conditions. Also, some text changes to the Parks and Recreation section. And then finally, how do we update the general plan? The general plan makes a distinction between minor amendments and major amendments. And so there were some proposed amendments in this section. and so we'll talk about some refinements here. Most of the comments we've had so far have been related to the first topic, the state land category, and the major amendment criteria. So for the rest of the few slides, I'm going to spend my time talking about those two items. Let's talk about the first one. The graphic that you're looking at on the right, that is a public land ownership. So the map shows areas in yellow, predominantly north of State Route 74. Those are lands that are owned by the Bureau of Land Management. They largely have a recreational position. They have their own plan and how they manage those areas. Areas in blue are areas that are owned by the State Land Department. So a little bit about the State Land Department. You heard a little bit about it during the study session today, but they have a constitutional mission that is they manage state trust lands across the state of Arizona. There's about 9.2 million acres of state trust land. 35,000 of those, or 55 square miles, are within Peoria's planning area. So we've got quite a large footprint of state land in the city of Peoria. So the way state land is, their mission is they hold land until they optimize its value. And then through leases and/or auctions, land sales, they raise proceeds. And so there's underlying beneficiaries. There happens to be 13 underlying beneficiaries, and the largest beneficiary is common schools or education. That's one way we fund education in the state. Now, one of the things that, one of the misconceptions that we've heard throughout the process is that state land should be perpetually vacant or should not be developed. And just to note, it would be a real fallacy to believe that it will not be auctioned off someday when it reaches its value, or will not be developed. All state land will eventually be developed. Many of these areas, as you can see on the screen, you look in the middle part of the city with Loop 303, these are strategically positioned along the Loop 303. So when you think about the remaining vacant area within the city of Peoria, and I think we had remarks earlier about it, effectively 75% of the remaining vacant area is state land. So it's really important to have a good relationship with the State Land Department and to work collaboratively on how those lands are managed and planned for in the future. Again, there's been a long-standing council priority for economic development, and that is to expand the footprint of quality jobs in base sectors throughout the city. The proposal, the first item, was to create a new land use designation. So the land use designation is intended to apply to trust lands of regional significance. More specifically, we're looking to apply it to two specific areas that will have an underlying master plan. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the master plan, the underlying, when I say master plan, it also is synonymous with zoning or a planned community district. They're all the same thing. The master plan is the details undergirding that area. So the two areas we're talking about, if you look at the graphic on the left, that's what we're calling the North Peoria Gateway. It's effectively about 1,620 acres. It's centered along the Loop 303 in Happy Valley, very important area. The other area that we're looking at is on the right, which we're calling the Peoria Innovation Core, and this is effectively 6,700 acres. So it's effectively all those lands. I know it might be hard to see on the screen, but you can see the red outline, but it's everything from Pleasant Valley all the way up north to State Route 74. So the idea for a state land designation, really what this does is it creates an umbrella. It says that we want to treat these areas as a cohesive, unified framework of thinking. All it says is that we're going to go forward and we're going to do a master plan underneath these areas. The master plan then will identify what are the allowable land uses, what are the densities, where will commercial areas be, what will the roadway and infrastructure inputs be for the area. So the land use designation just creates the platform to go forward and to do a master plan, which of course includes its own public engagement process. When you go through a rezoning process, as you all know, there's quite a bit of public engagement inputs there. So this just says we're going to treat this as a unit. It's the umbrella for that area. Now, the master plan process, I will note, has kicked off for the North Peoria Gateway, meaning we have a rezoning case in for the 1,600 acres. The State Land Department is the applicant, and so that is very early in the process. There is a public meeting scheduled for May 15th on that one. On the one on the right, the master plan process has not kicked off for that one. That is in the future at some undetermined date. Collectively, these two areas comprise 8,300 acres. I have seen some questions or some contemplations that the city was purchasing 8,300 acres. That is not true. All we're talking about doing is master planning 2 specific areas that collectively are 8,300 acres in size. But to put a finer point, the idea of creating an umbrella designation for an area is not atypical, or it's not dissimilar to what we already do for 3 areas in Peoria. So if you look at the graphic up there, what you can see are some master plans that we all know and love, including Vistancia, Saddleback Heights, and Lake Pleasant Heights. You're looking at the existing general plan map, and you'll note that the designations for those 3 areas, they're designated master plan area. Again, that's that large umbrella that says we're going to go forward, treat this as one unit, we're going to have an underlying rezone or master plan that identifies all the specific details of that. This really is very similar to that effort there. It contains all the regulatory requirements that apply to that community. Another misconception that I've heard is that the state land use designation will eliminate open space or critical areas. Folks, as I mentioned, general plan is not zoning. That is not a factual statement. It does not change the existing regulations that we already have on the books that protect hillside areas, washes, cultural facilities, or natural open space. Those regulations remain in place. And in fact, someday when some of these areas are auctioned off and a developer comes forward with a project, they would have to shape their development profile in line with those existing regulations that we have. Of course, we want to protect critical areas throughout the city. We're not deviating from that. Again, all this says is we're going to treat these areas as a unit and go forward in a master plan format. As you heard earlier during the study session, we had a presentation about the feasibility of a potential air park. I just want to clarify and amplify that that is a separate and independent exploration effort. It has its own decision points. That is not related to this. Whether that is realized or not, that does not negate the outcome. It does not negate the benefit of a holistic approach to planning. We would say that this is just prudent planning to look at things holistically and go through a master plan approach and how we want to identify these different attributes. The fourth item, as I mentioned, so state law leaves it up to each community to decide what a major amendment is. What's a major alteration to your land use base or your general plan? Now, most communities of our size, they vary, right? Every community can pick their own threshold. In cities of our size, they vary from 160 acres, 320 acres, 640 acres. City of Phoenix happens to be 3 square miles and 5 square miles. Currently, we are 80 acres. So during the general plan process, we had proposed that the major amendment threshold should be changed from 80 acres to 640. Now, just thinking about the process for conducting minor amendments and major amendments, I just want to make the point that the process is nearly indistinguishable, meaning that we still do a very comprehensive analysis on major and minor amendments. They still go through the same level of public outreach and notification to stakeholders. The only distinguishing elements are the vote that's required of council and one additional public hearing at the Planning Commission, but they're nearly indistinguishable. The proposed change that we made was really an attempt to make the process more streamlined and localized. Major amendments, not to get too far in the weeds, but they require action within 12 months of submittal. A minor amendment can be more organic, meaning we've had cases where we've had a lot of public interest on a project, and so rather than having that artificial 12-month period, it allows for a more organic process and for more meetings to occur over the process that it should require and the amount of public input that we should get in that. But nonetheless, through the amendment process, we have heard a lot of concerns about the changes, and we've elected to pull this item back and leave it the way it is. So we'll continue to process amendments with the current criteria. You can see that portion crossed out. What I do want to mention, so the one surviving element that we are proposed, and I would argue that it's very perfunctory, but it just says up here, and I know you can't read it, I'll read it for you, but it essentially says that if there's a realignment of any roadway on our circulation plan, or if we change the classification from a future roadway to a built roadway, we would do that administratively. All it's saying is it's just allowing us to do cleanups administratively and not having to come back to council to recognize a road that's already in place. That's all that does there. Mayor and Council, with my last slide, I just wanted to identify the upcoming dates here. So our next public touch point, we have a update that we're going to do with the Planning and Zoning Commission, talk to them about the process, what we've heard. We have a period, it's called 60-day review, where all agencies can comment on the general plan that happens to end June 19th. We do have public hearings that are proposed for Planning Commission, one on July 18th at Rio Vista, and one August 15th. Now, the one on July 18th is off-site, and that's because state law mandates that we have at least one off-site public hearing with Planning Commission. So that's why it's there. And then our plan is to bring the general plan package back to City Council for a September 17th public hearing and potential action. So with that, I can take any questions.
Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris, for the clarification. Can you describe a little bit how we're protecting our current and future open space going forward? And, you know, if this passes, does that align with our current plans for preserving open space?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Edwards, absolutely. So all this does is it places a boundary over a unit of geography that says we're going to treat this area cohesively. What it doesn't do is it doesn't remove all the existing zoning regulations that we have that govern how a site will develop. So I mentioned earlier about our desert lands ordinance, the hillside ordinance, all those remain intact. Any future development would have to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Oh, Councilor Crawford, sorry. You were super fast.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the presentation. Sorry for the slow trigger. You touched on this, but I just want to clarify. So what would happen if the council rejected the general plan amendment?
Mayor Pro Tem Crawford, that's a great question. Actually, that's a really good point that I wanted to make during my presentation, and that is, if the council rejected these amendments and we chose not to treat these areas as unified elements, one alternative could be is that land will eventually get auctioned off. It might get auctioned off in 50 acres, 100 acres at a time. It will get auctioned off, and we will see a series of disparate and disjointed rezones come to council without any unifying elements to it. That is a possible result if the general plan amendment was rejected.
So repeat that one more time so everybody understands that, because I think that's probably one of the most important parts of this. If the city does not do this.
Yes, Mayor, Council, so if we did not go forward, what that's saying is we're not going to treat these two areas, these two important areas, as cohesive, unified areas and do a master plan. What that says is we'll allow, state land will auction these properties off on their own timing, and we'll see developers come in with rezones that may or may not have any relationship to all because we'll see tens of, with this amount of land, we'll see tens of rezones, and they may not have any relationship with one another.
So just so everybody understands that in layman's terms, either we define our future by doing this, and we actually take hold of this and actually work with state land, which we are. The MPG was already in process, but with the PIC, we either define this or some other developer will end up defining this for us. I would much rather have this in the hands of the people of Peoria than a developer from out of state or even out of country. Heaven forbid, and in the hands of the good citizens of Peoria, so we can actually define what our future truly is. So, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.